It was the kind of evening where wealth dripped from every corner of the mansion. Chandeliers worth more than most people's houses sparkled above an endless ballroom, and crystal glasses clinked with vintage champagne as the city's most influential gathered to celebrate yet another milestone for the Hartford family. They were the face of power in the financial world, a dynasty of white billionaires whose legacy stretched across industries and governments. The Hartford patriarch, Richard Hartford, stood with his three sons and a cluster of high society allies, basking in the glow of admiration and envy alike. This was their world, their kingdom, and no one dared to challenge them. The music filled the air, violins and piano blending with laughter. Women in glittering gowns whispered in corners, men in tailored suits struck deals with casual words. Yet all eyes shifted when she walked in. Her presence was impossible to ignore. Tall, poised, with skin that glowed like polished bronze under the lights, she wore a gown of deep emerald silk that cascaded like flowing water. She was a vision of elegance and strength, her confidence radiating with each step. Her name was Amara Lewis, a self-made businesswoman whose empire spanned tech, finance, and media. To some in that room, she was a partner. To others, she was a mystery. But to the Hartford family, she was little more than a pawn in a massive $5 billion deal they expected to control. Whispers fluttered as she passed. "That's her, Amara Lewis. She's the one Richard's been negotiating with. A black woman running a global empire? Can you imagine?" The comments were laced with curiosity, envy, and something darker, something Amara had grown used to hearing all her life, but never once bowed to. She approached the family with a polite smile, extending her hand in courtesy. Richard Hartford shook it with a practiced charm, but his sons were less subtle. One smirked, another chuckled, and the youngest leaned in to whisper something that made the others burst into quiet laughter. Amara caught it. She always did. Years of being underestimated had trained her ears and sharpened her instincts. But instead of reacting, she smiled wider, her silence louder than any retort. As the evening stretched on, the Hartfords' arrogance became bolder. When Amara spoke about her vision for sustainable investments, one son interrupted with a joke about charity projects and how people like her must love handouts. Another laughed at her pronunciation of a European firm's name, mocking her accent, though she had studied in Oxford and spoke 4 languages fluently. The youngest went further, asking her if she had ever attended parties like this before, or if she just Googled how to act rich. The words weren't just offensive, they were humiliating. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to hear, others silently condemning the behavior. But in that moment, the power dynamics seemed fixed, the Hartford family mocking, and Amara enduring. What they didn't know was that Amara wasn't a guest looking for validation. She was the deal-maker holding the cards to their future. The $5 billion merger they were celebrating prematurely rested entirely in her hands. She was the investor, the partner, the decision-maker. And their treatment of her tonight wasn't just personal, it was professional suicide. Yet Amara remained composed. She knew the weight of patience, the value of silence before the storm. Instead of lashing out, she observed. Every insult, every smirk, every patronizing laugh etched itself into her memory. She smiled politely, raised her glass in mock toasts, and let them believe they had won the game of dominance. But inside her resolve hardened like steel. They thought they were mocking a woman beneath them. In reality, they were mocking the woman who owned the very bridge they needed to cross. As the night closed in and guests began to disperse, Amara excused herself gracefully. She walked through the marble halls, her heels clicking with authority, her expression unreadable. But her silence was not weakness. It was strategy. She had witnessed empires rise and fall, and she knew that power wasn't about who laughed the loudest. It was about who made the final decision when the laughter faded. And soon the Hartford family would discover the cost of their arrogance. The next morning, sunlight streamed across the skyline, bathing the city in a golden glow. Amara sat in her penthouse office, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the bustling world below. Her assistants moved quietly, aware of her mood. On the desk before her lay the draft agreement with the Hartford family, a deal that would merge their financial empire with her innovative tech conglomerate. Together, it had the potential to create one of the most powerful alliances in the world. But to Amara, the numbers on the page meant little compared to what had happened the night before. She replayed their words in her mind, the dismissive chuckles, the way they had reduced her presence to a spectacle. She wasn't new to prejudice. Her journey had been forged in the fires of it. As a young girl growing up on the south side of Chicago, she had been told again and again that her dreams were too big, her ambitions unrealistic. She had worked through nights of hunger, studied by candlelight when the lights were cut, and built her first business with nothing but a second-hand laptop and unshakable willpower. Every slight, every insult had been fuel, shaping her into the titan she had become. The Hartfords, she realized, hadn't just mocked her as a woman at a party. They mocked her entire story, her resilience, her right to stand on equal footing with them. That wasn't something she could overlook, not for $5 billion, not for 50. Respect could never be bought, and once lost, it could never be earned back the same way. Her phone rang. It was her chief legal officer, Daniel. "Amara, the Hartfords are eager to finalize. They want to schedule a press conference by Friday. Should we push the final draft?" Amara paused, her lips curling into the faintest smile. "Not yet," she replied. "There are still considerations." Later that afternoon, she arrived at another board meeting downtown, where her partners from different industries had gathered. Executives, investors, leaders of multinational firms, many of whom had heard whispers of the Hartford family's behavior. Amara entered the room and silence fell. She carried herself with such presence that no one dared interrupt. "I need you all to understand something," she began, her voice calm but firm. "We don't just build companies, we build legacies, and legacies are not measured by profits alone, but by the values we uphold. The Hartfords believe they can laugh in the face of dignity and still do business as usual. They believe their money protects them from consequences. I intend to show them otherwise." The room shifted, executives exchanging uneasy glances. Canceling a $5 billion deal was unheard of. It would shock the financial world. But Amara had earned their trust, and more importantly, their respect. "Amara," one board member spoke carefully, "you're saying you'd walk away from the biggest deal of your career over a social slight?" Amara's eyes locked on him. "It wasn't a slight, it was a mirror. It showed me exactly how they see me, how they see us. If they treat their partner like a joke in public, how do you think they'll treat our people, our communities, our future behind closed doors? This is bigger than me. This is about principle. And principle is not for sale." Her words resonated deeply. By the end of the meeting, murmurs of agreement filled the room. Some feared the backlash, others admired the courage, but no one doubted her conviction. That evening, the Hartford family gathered in their grand estate, completely oblivious. They were already drafting press releases, discussing stock surges, and boasting about how they would absorb Amara's company into their legacy. To them, the deal was done. Their arrogance blinded them to the storm quietly forming around them. Meanwhile, Amara prepared her move. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to retaliate with anger. Power wasn't about noise, it was about timing. The press conference was scheduled for Friday. She intended to let them prepare their celebrations, let them build their pride to its peak, and then with one stroke, she would dismantle it. 2 days later, Amara stood before her mirror, adjusting a tailored black suit. Unlike the party gown, this outfit wasn't about beauty. It was about authority. She glanced at her reflection, remembering every struggle, every barrier she had shattered. Tonight wasn't just business, it was personal. At the press hall, the room was filled with journalists, investors, and analysts. Cameras flashed as the Hartford family arrived in designer suits, shaking hands and smiling like royalty. Richard Hartford gave a booming speech about the future, about partnerships, and shared growth. His sons smirked, already tasting the power that was soon to be theirs. Then came Amara's turn. She stepped up to the podium, her presence commanding silence. Her voice rang clear, every syllable deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering here today. You were told this would be the announcement of a historic partnership, a deal worth $5 billion, a merger to reshape the industry. But what you were not told is the truth." The room stirred, cameras zoomed in. Richard Hartford shifted uncomfortably, his sons exchanging puzzled looks. "The truth is that business is not just about numbers. It is about respect, integrity, and vision. And respect cannot exist where arrogance reigns. Integrity cannot exist where dignity is mocked. Vision cannot exist where prejudice clouds judgment." Last week, at a private gathering, the Hartford family made it clear that they see this partnership not as an alliance, but as a conquest. They made it clear that they see me not as an equal, but as an object of ridicule. And that is something I will never, ever accept. Gasps echoed across the hall. The Hartfords' faces turned red, their smirks wiped away in an instant. Richard leaned forward, whispering furiously to his assistant, but it was too late. "That is why," Amara declared, her voice unwavering, "I am canceling this deal, effective immediately. My company will not merge with the Hartford empire. We will not align ourselves with those who mock what we stand for. And let this be a message, not just to them, but to every room where people believe power gives them permission to belittle others. Dignity is not negotiable." The hall erupted. Some applauded, some gasped. Journalists scrambled to take notes as cameras flashed wildly. The Hartford family sat frozen, their empire suddenly shaken by a truth they hadn't anticipated. $5 billion, gone in an instant. But worse than the money was the humiliation. Their arrogance had been exposed before the world, and it was Amara Lewis who held the final word. The aftermath of that press conference rippled like an earthquake through the financial world. Headlines exploded across every major outlet within hours. $5 billion deal canceled on live stage. Amara Lewis shuts down Hartford empire with one speech. Respect over riches, the deal that never happened. Stock analysts scrambled to assess the fallout. The Hartford family's shares, once considered untouchable, began to plummet as investors questioned their leadership. Reporters dug into their history, unearthing patterns of arrogance, discriminatory behavior, and failed alliances. What had been whispered in closed circles was now shouted in headlines, magnified by Amara's public stand. Meanwhile, her company soared. Investors admired her courage, communities praised her integrity, and young entrepreneurs, especially women and people of color, looked to her as living proof that power wasn't just about wealth, but about values. Overnight, she had become not just a business leader, but a symbol. But behind the applause and chaos, Amara remained calm. She hadn't made her choice for publicity or fame, she had made it because it was right. Sitting in her office days later, she read letters pouring in from young students, mothers, and struggling entrepreneurs. Some thanked her for showing strength. Others confessed that they too had endured rooms filled with mockery, prejudice, and silence. Her actions had spoken for them when they couldn't. Her assistant knocked gently and entered with a tablet. "You should see this," he said, handing it over. On the screen was a live broadcast of Richard Hartford, flanked by his sons attempting to salvage their reputation. His voice was tight, forced. "We regret any misunderstandings that may have occurred," Richard said stiffly. "The Hartford family values diversity, and we are committed to—" Amara muted it. She didn't need to hear excuses. They weren't apologizing because they had changed. They were apologizing because they had lost. That was the difference. Real change came from within, not from PR rehearsals. Later that evening, Amara attended a gala hosted by an international nonprofit supporting minority entrepreneurs. The room erupted in applause as she entered. But what struck her most wasn't the flashing cameras or the prestigious guests. It was the group of young people standing at the back, watching her with wide eyes filled with hope. She remembered herself at that age, standing outside glittering events like this one, convinced she would never belong. Now she stood here not just as a guest, but as proof that the impossible could be conquered. Taking the stage, she addressed the crowd. Her words carried more weight now than ever. "Success," she began softly, "isn't measured by the size of your bank account, but by the size of your backbone. It's easy to sign a deal when everyone respects you. It's harder to walk away when they don't. I didn't cancel a deal for $5 billion because I didn't need the money. I canceled it because I needed to remind the world and myself that respect cannot be bought, traded, or begged for. It must be earned, and it must be mutual." The audience leaned in, hanging on every word. "I know what it's like to be laughed at, to be underestimated, to be told you don't belong in the rooms where decisions are made. But let me tell you this, when they laugh, remember who you are. When they mock, remember what you stand for. And when they think you are powerless, remember that power isn't given, it's claimed." The applause thundered through the hall, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very walls. Amara smiled, but inside she was humbled. This wasn't about her, it was about the message she carried, one forged by generations before her who had fought for dignity and equality. She was just one voice in a long line of voices refusing to be silenced. The following weeks reshaped the balance of power in the industry. Other companies began reassessing their partnerships, realizing that arrogance and prejudice carried real costs. Boards demanded accountability, CEOs issued apologies, and conversations about respect and diversity filled boardrooms that had long ignored them. Amara hadn't just canceled a deal, she had sparked a movement. The Hartford family, once untouchable, now found themselves cornered. Investors withdrew, allies distanced themselves, and the media scrutinized their every step. They tried to reach out to Amara, offering apologies, even begging for reconsideration, but she didn't respond. Some doors, once closed, remain locked forever. On a quiet Sunday morning, Amara visited her mother's grave. She knelt by the headstone, brushing away leaves, and let the silence of the cemetery wash over her. Her mother had been her first teacher, the one who taught her to walk tall even when the world tried to push her down. "They tried to make me small again, Mama," Amara whispered, her voice trembling. "But I didn't let them. I remembered what you told me, that no amount of money is worth your self-respect, and I hope you're proud of me." A breeze rustled through the trees as if answering. Amara closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of peace. She had honored her mother's legacy, and in doing so, carved a new path for countless others. Back in the city, the world moved on. Deals were made, fortunes shifted, but Amara's story remained etched in people's minds. Not as the woman who lost 5 billion, but as the woman who proved that 5 billion meant nothing without respect. And somewhere, in boardrooms across the globe, powerful men and women paused before speaking, paused before laughing at the expense of others, because they remembered the day a black woman in an emerald gown smiled through their mockery, only to stand before the world and take everything from them with the power of her dignity.